Good morning. Food and memory. Why would anyone want to remember anything they had eaten? This was the question, the response, in fact, that rang in my ears when I first presented my research on this topic to colleagues at Oxford University about 20 years ago. And in the context of Oxford High Table, where we labored to swallow a variety of overboiled potatoes and vegetables, I suppose this response made sense. But it struck me how different it was from what I had been hearing from people in Greece who not only filled their stories about the past, and I had started out just looking at memory and people's attitudes toward the past, and I started to notice how many of their stories seemed to be filled with these seemingly trivial details about the food they had been eating when some interesting or important event had occurred. And as I got toward the end of my research, my first research, and I was getting ready to leave, I also heard the injunction from many people, eat so that you remember Greece. Eat so that you remember Kalevala, the island that I was studying. So I do research on Kalevala, which you can see toward the top middle there, very close to Turkey. And it's known as the island of sponge divers because it's very barren, as you can see. They don't grow a lot. It's oriented toward the sea. And I want to talk about today the importance of culture and the importance of context in understanding food memory and the experience of taste. And I'm going to start just by showing you a very brief clip from a video. I had been doing a project of filming people's everyday cooking. And I was interested in particular about mothers and daughters and grandmothers and granddaughters and how this cooking knowledge passed through the generations, or if it did at all. So let me just show you just a moment.
Τσιγάρισα το κιμά, μου φύγει το νερό, σκέτο μόνο του. Μετά έβαλα βούτυρο, να τσιγαριστεί και αυτός μαζί, να μαγειρευτεί. Και μετά έβαλα κανέλα, πιπέρι, κρεμμύδια, σκόρδο, δάφνη.
Τώρα με το χέρι, δεν πειράζει, η κουζίνα θέλει χέρι. Δάφνη, λίγο κόκκινο κρασί,
σάλτσα,
ντομάτα φρέσκια, λεσμένη, λιωμένη και από πάνω το πελτέ. Και πολύ σκάλισμα, το κάθε υλικό δεν μπαίνουν όλα μαζί, ένα με τη σειρά. Υπάρχει μια τάξη στο μαγείρεμα γενικώς. Θα βάλεις την κανέλα, μετά από λίγο το πιπέρι, το αλάτι, τη δάφνη, ένα-ένα.
Το κάθε υλικό,
να ακούσεις τη μυρωδιά. Να ακούσεις τη μυρωδιά. Κατάλαβες?
So you did hear that right, or I should say I did translate that right. She said, so that you hear the smell of each ingredient. And this was one of the things that cued me to what I call the kind of everyday synesthesia on Kalevala and in Greece, where sensory experience wasn't segmented in the way that I had grown up thinking of it. And this everyday synesthesia that people could express in language was, to me, part of a whole orientation toward food and the taste of food that that was such a common everyday topic throughout the community, and not just among women. Women, men, young, old, everybody was interested in the process of creating flavors. Everybody was interested in dissecting the results of the creation of different flavors. And I should stress that these weren't exotic flavors. They weren't seeking the new or the unusual. These were the flavors that they had known and were familiar with, and were very interested in parsing out all of the fine distinctions between a bean stew that had been made with spring water to soak the beans, or with cistern water to soak the beans, for example. Cistern water is better. And this was very striking to me, because I would have men give me long discourses about how to prepare an octopus, and whether you should boil out the salt in the octopus and then add salt later, or leave the salt that was already in the octopus in the dish. And so I would ask the man, well, when did you last make this? And he would say, oh, I never make it. And yet he knew and cared about the details of how it was made. And this was also part of a kind of sense of a kind of density of associations with each food, so that I call it a kind of indigenous terroir, so that it mattered to people that they were eating, and they knew whether they were eating the figs from Marije's field or from Yanni's field, and that had all kinds of other social implications and associations. And the fact that people, ordinary people, what we would call working class people, could very happily tell me about the different qualities of different olive oils, or the different flavor profiles of different local honeys. This was very much part of their orientation toward the importance of taste and the memorability of food. So I'm going to give you, sorry, even mixed martial artists take notes. And one other striking thing was how common metaphor was in talking about this. So it wasn't even an analogy. It wasn't that people would say, I mean, how do you talk about the taste of food? This is a problem that we're all concerned about. How do you describe the taste of food, or even the taste of wine, if you're not an expert? But I found that people would say, that orange I just ate, banana. So not even it was like a banana, but just banana. Or that bean stew, Turkish delight. So there was a sense of using metaphors to find a category of something that had even more of the properties that you were looking for in that particular food. So it was even sweeter than you could imagine an orange being. It was sweet as a banana, but not sweet as a banana like an analogy or a simile, just banana. So I just want to talk about two examples of foods for which context is so essential for understanding their significance and their memorability. And one of them is, it's unfortunate, you can't really tell from these pictures. It looks like it might be a cake, but this is a dish called Kalevala, which is what you see on the top is powdered sugar, and it's decorated with various seeds and almonds, and you can decorate it with different kinds of things and use different patterns. But inside is boiled wheat berries and all kinds of seeds and nuts also on the inside. And this is the food that you use to memorialize the dead. So you make this food on All Souls Day, and you bring it to the church to be blessed, and then you walk around outside the church feeding spoonfuls of this food to your neighbors as they feed it theirs to you, or feeding it to passers-by. And then you might leave a plate of this Kalevala outside your front door so that the dead will come and eat it. But this is not just about feeding the dead. This is about the dead feeding the living, because when you have memorial services for the dead, which you have very many memorial services for the dead in Greece, not just one or two, you enter the hall for the memorial service, and there's a picture of the dead person propped up right by a plate of this Kalevala that you're going to eat, as if that person was offering it to you, because making Kalevala and eating Kalevala is about extending the generosity of people even beyond the grave. And generosity is one of the core values in this community, and so it's very important to continue to be generous even after you've passed on. And so people actually get really worried as they get older about whether their relatives will make Kalevala for them. It's a topic of constant concern. And on the other hand, the living people have dreams. I've often heard dreams where the dead person comes and tells them, "You haven't made Kalevala for me." And so it's an obligation that they have to fulfill. So this is a taste of loss, of sorrow, but it's also very much a taste of continuity. And of course, the symbolism of the ingredients here, nuts and seeds, are all things that as they fall to the ground and they rot, they give forth new life. And so the density of associations around Kalevala make it one of the key ways that people use food very explicitly and ritually for remembering the past. Now, my second example is Basil. And this one is always has been a puzzle to me for a long time, and because basil is absolutely ubiquitous in Greece, but people rarely eat it. And why is this? People have pots of basil everywhere. It's part of the kitchen environment. You might have a pot of basil on your windowsill. Men will put a sprig of basil in their lapels when they go out in the world. Your relatives might put some basil on your dashboard when you're taking a trip in your car. People put basil pots like this at the entrance to their offices so customers or clients can come into the office and wipe their hands on the basil and enjoy its properties as they go about their business. Basil is used often in preparing the dead body for a funeral. There are so many uses of basil in Greece. It really, for migrants, it's associated with remembering Greece when they're abroad. But one of the key uses of basil is in the church. In this case, outside of the church, you see a priest. What they do is they dip a sprig of basil in holy water, and then they'll kind of fling it on you to bless you. And they'll also use a sprig of basil to bless a new house construction, or here it's at a school, the first day of school, the priest will anoint you or fling holy water scented with basil on your head. And this association in Greek Orthodoxy comes from the legend that St. Helen, when she visited the tomb of Christ, didn't find anything there, but found basil growing on top of the tomb. So once again, symbolically dense, representing the idea of new life. So basil, despite its, or in this case, because of its dense symbolic associations, seems somehow inappropriate. It's not exactly forbidden, but it seems somehow inappropriate to use it in food. It has too much of the smell of the sacred in it to enjoy it in everyday cooking. And this is a dish of eggplant with meat and bechamel sauce, and this was prepared by one of my friends in Kalymnos who's trying to develop a kind of nouveau Mediterranean cuisine, and she says she likes to use basil, and all of the tourist customers who come to her restaurant love these things, and the locals just can't get used to it. So once again, in trying to understand the taste of food, and you know, of course, in other ways, Greek food, very similar flavor profile to Italian food. Italians use basil all the time in cooking. But to make sense of this, we have to really delve into all of the context around basil that makes it inappropriate to use in Greece. And I don't know much about Hindu practices, but I've been told that they also have a similar view of basil, which is seen as sacred, is seen as a goddess, I believe, the Tulsi basil, the holy basil. So, how am I doing for time? Right on time. Okay, so my last idea that I'll leave you with is that I was interested in how when migrants traveled abroad, their relatives in Greece would often send them packages of food. And this was even more important back in the old days when they couldn't get things like feta cheese or even olive oil in many parts of in many of the places where they would migrate to. And one man told me about going into a chemist shop, a pharmacy, and buying a tiny vial of olive oil. This was back in the 1970s, where that's the only place you could get it in England, and drinking it in the store just to remind him of the flavor of olive oil, right? We've already mentioned Proust, and I'm sure we're going to hear about Proust over the next 2 days. But to me, the power of Proust's Madeleine is because he says that even though taste and smell are ephemeral and fragmentary, they have this ability to unlock the vast structure of recollection. And so it's this idea of the fragment that can recall the whole. And this is how people would describe getting these packages to me. One woman said, I went to the post office in Germany and I opened the package of food from Kalymnos, and it was like I was holding the whole world in my hands. And this is a kind of response to the experience of isolation or fragmentation or alienation from moving to and living in another society, that food has this ability to tie things together. But this is, of course, what we mean by, or what I mean by culture or context. Understanding the culture or context behind food memories and food taste is about seeing how all of these things are tied together. Thank you.